All right, we ready, Mr. Marler.
All right. I'm doing my birth year project on Pascal, specifically Turbo Pascal 4.0. Wikipedia defines Pascal as Turbo Pascal was released in 1987, but Pascal was developed earlier, which I'll get into its history. Wikipedia defines Pascal as an imperative and procedural programming language created by Nicholas Wirth as a small, efficient language intended to encourage good programming practices using structured programming and data structuring. Pascal was released in 1970 and is considered a third-generation programming language. The programming language was named Pascal in order to honor Blaise Pascal, which is a French mathematician. He was credited with developing the Pascaline, which is a machine that could add and subtract. And this was in 1642. So in November of 1985, Microsoft launched their operating system called Windows. That was their first iteration of Windows. Apple started using Turbo Pascal in 1986 after it was ported by Danish programmer Anders Helsberg of software development company called Borland. Turbo Pascal 4.0 as well, like I said, was released in 1987 by Anders. Turbo Pascal is a compiler and integrated development environment for Pascal programming languages. And it runs on a few systems, notably CP/M, I'm not sure what that is, and then DOS. The way I look at it, Turbo Pascal 4 was basically the merging of that language with the PC. Apple was already doing this in like 1985, but they weren't using DOS. DOS was Microsoft's operating system. If you call programs, Turbo Pascal 4 also introduced, once you compile programs in Turbo Pascal 4.0, it introduced the .exe, and that's coming from the old file type, which was .com. I'm not sure what the .com stands for. Turbo Pascal introduced concept of program units, which are a library of procedures that can be compiled separately and used later, kind of like function. Hobbyists were looking for a replacement language. They've been using BASIC, that's in all caps, it's a programming language that was developed and introduced in 1975, so they've been waiting 12 years for a new language they can work on and get better at it. And that's all I have for Pascal, Pascal 4.0, 1987.
Right. I think with that .com, that's .com. At one time with DOS, you had commands that was .com. I think with the system files, you had command.com.
Right.
So that was the file that actually loaded the operating system. And then, like you said, over time they started just using the exe file. So, and exes was executable file. Yeah. So I think it got some type of relationship with that, the .com, .exe. Right.
Also, Apple was the branch or subset that added on the object
oriented language.
With I can't remember the name of it. I think it's Apple Lisa. That's what they created for specifically object oriented, and that also made its way into Turbo Pascal 4.0, and it also influenced what we know today as Java.
Right. See, Borland was I think the company name, and Borland also developed and produced C++.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I know they were started with 3 Danish citizens that came.
They would sell C++, Borland C++.
What is BASIC? That's a computer language.
It's one of the languages from where? From that what operating system?
I want to say it's for Windows.
No, go back. DOS. See, back in the day there was DOS, and you really didn't have for a user, you had that cursor, right? So they had basic, you know. So basic was just a language that you could type certain commands, and then like I say, you could get output too. Then they got quick basic, and then quick basic was a language that pretty much I think was with the when you got a little bit of with the Windows environment. But basic was it was used, but it was not. It was kind of frowned upon, and the reason why it's frowned upon is because of go-to statements. And the statement, the go-to statement. And what I mean is like, you know how you write your C++ programs? Everybody took my class, and you have a loop, right? And you're gonna perform whatever in that loop till whatever. You can't go back in that loop, right? But with basic, you had your statements, and you could have a command. And if you had a loop up here, you could have a go-to statement that says go to this line inside that loop, and that could cause havoc. You know what I'm saying? So that's why people kind of frowned upon it. But it was a language. It was a good language. You know, you just had to make sure you knew what you was doing, where your go-tos was going, because you could run into some infinite loops or whatever or whatnot, stuff like that. Yeah, but it was a language, and it was a good language to learn. You know, because when I graduated college, I went to my high school, and I taught the some of the kids that was in the algebra and trade classes basic.
They had that back in your day?
But that's when it came. That was in the DOS era. See, Windows, I think Windows, when I was working, Windows came out in the late 80s, or mid to late 80s. That's when like almost in the 90s, that's when Windows came out. But DOS was the thing. You put your disk in, and it boots up, you get your prompt, whether it's your A prompt, and then you have to type your commands, or either put the disk that you wanted to execute and type that executable file name and run your game, run your software, whatever. That's just the way it was back then. Right. And then they eventually evolved into the Windows where you had graphical interfaces. You had your operating system on a hard drive, which was large enough to hold your information. Then your RAM had to increase so that you can run all these things. Right. But back in the day, yep, that's the way it was. You had to actually know some commands. You buy a box of diskettes. What you had to do with them before you use them? You had to format them. Now you had to, sometimes you had to know the parameters of that format statement based on the type disk you have or the type disk drive you have. Or you might, because if you got a drive that can read high and low level, if you bought low level disk, then you may have to format with some parameter. High density format with some parameter. So stuff like that, you know. But basically, you know, you had a manual, that big hard binder manual, and you could go through all of the DOS commands. All right. That was DOS. All right. All right, Mr. Marler.